Hello, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to my stream. My name is Hillary, and I am a Kohenet in training. This stream is part of my priestess project. I also go by Chedva, which is my Hebrew name. Yeah, I hope everyone's having a good Shabbat. It's very dreary where I am. It's been very windy, not quite stormy, but like wet. There's a little bit of drizzle right now. I'm looking out the window. It's a good time to be inside. And it's very chilly. I did not anticipate all these layers today. I actually changed more than once because it kept getting chillier. So yeah, I'm staying very cozy. So this week is Lech Lecha, and I will paste my study sheet in the chat. Oh, I also want to remember, before I forget, I got some feedback on sound from a couple people on this stream, so I've adjusted the sound settings with my my streaming software, but feel free to give me more feedback. There are some things I can probably fix, there's some things I might not be able to, simply because I don't have like expensive streaming and recording accoutrements, so but I still nonetheless appreciate the feedback, so I can try to improve it. Yeah, I know that you can like hear my tip tapping and things like that. Okay. So I'm gonna get a little bit of a drink because my throat is a little bit dry. Alright, let me get my study sheet up on the screen for all of you. Sorry, just a moment here. There we go. You get a bit bigger. And... okay. That's about as good as I'm gonna do. So at least now you can see my sheet. Alright, I'm gonna say our prayer before Torah study. Brachat Shekhinah Eloteinu Barach Ha'olam Asher Kidshatnu B'mitzvoteha Vitzivatnu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Holy One, whose presence fills creation, making us holy through the sacred connective action of cultivating words of Torah. So I wrote up this little summary of Lech Lecha, because a lot happens in it. I actually wrote down more points than I thought because a lot, like, more happened in it than even I remembered. So I will mostly be concentrating on Sarah and Hagar, because that's who I'm personally interested in. But so we're all on the same page. I'm going to read you my Lech Lecha summary. So, at the beginning, Avram gets a message from God telling him to leave Haran, where he's living at that time. He had moved there from Ur to Haran, with his household, including his wife Sarai and nephew Lot. So there's this incident where Avram goes to Egypt because there's a famine, but Egypt being a breadbasket, you can get food there. Sarai briefly enters the harem of Pharaoh because she's so gorgeous that Avram pretends that he's her sister, so he won't get killed. And Avram gets lots of livestock. And then plagues befall the house of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh attributes it to Sarai being Avram's wife. It doesn't say how he figures this out, but he does. And so Sarai gets kicked out of the harem and goes back to Avram, and they leave with all of the lots of things that Avram bought. So Lot and Avram decide to part because there isn't enough grazing land for both of their flocks and their household. So Lot settles near Sodom, or known in English as Sodom. This is some foreshadowing. And Avram settles in the terebinths of Mamre, which is a grove. Terebinths are a certain kind of tree. It's a grove of a certain type of tree. Sorry, my throat is very dry. So there's a war, there's a lot of political turmoil, and there's a war amongst various kings. And during that conflict, Lot is kidnapped, so Avram saves him. Then God promises Avram. So Avram has not been able to have biological offspring, and he's upset, and he doesn't want to leave his estate to his steward. And God promises Avram that he will have biological offspring and countless descendants, as many as the stars in the sky. And God also promises him land in Canaan. Sarai also wants an heir, and she proposed that Avram consort with her maid Hagar, so that Sarai can have, so that those offspring can be counted as Sarai's offspring. So Hagar becomes pregnant, but Sarai is lowered in her esteem, and Sarai perceives her as haughty and treats her very harshly. Hagar runs away, but God convinces Hagar to return and promises Hagar that she will have a son named Ishmael. And God names Ishmael preemptively, and many descendants of her own. Ishmael is born, and God reaffirms the covenant with Avram and renames him Avraham, which means father of a multitude. Avram means exalted father, but adding the Avraham makes it father of a multitude, and tells him to circumcise all the males in his household. And part of this covenant, God also renames Sarai as Sarah and blesses her. And God reaffirms that Avraham will have a son by Sarah, that the son will be named Yitzchak or Isaac, and God also blesses Ishmael. And Avraham listens to God and circumcises all the males in his household. So, I say up front that a lot of I will be drawing from one text a lot in this stream. It's not the only text I'll be drawing to, but it is Sarah the Priestess, the first matriarch of Genesis, by Savina Tubal. For a lot of folks in the Kohanet community, this is probably a very familiar book, but maybe not to everyone. It has been very influential in my thinking about Bereshit, about Genesis, and the matriarchs of Genesis. It provides a really non-traditional interpretation of some of the behavior of the matriarchs of Genesis, and I think it's very interesting and persuasive. Some people might be a bit controversial. And as you can probably guess from the title, Sarah the Priestess, the argument, so giving a brief summary of the argument that Tubal makes, she argues that the actions of the matriarchs of Bereshit that seem kind of strange or don't have a lot of context in the way the story is traditionally told can be explained if you imagine that they are some kind of religious functionary, and Tubal refers to them as priestesses, with reference to Mesopotamian priestesses. Because remember, Avraham and Sarah come from Ur originally, before they end up in Canaan. So presumably they were influenced culturally from being from there. And so Tubal researches Mesopotamian priestesses, like there might be in Ur and other areas, and applies that to the actions of, this time we're going to talk about Sarah, but also to Rivka and Rachel. But this time we're going to talk about Sarah, because that's where all the action is this time. Just give you that background. That is who I'm going to be drawing from quite a bit. So, now that we've had our little Lech Lecha cliff notes, let's read a passage from Genesis 12. Avram went forth as the Lord had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. I just want to mention, I love, and I do find it really inspiring whenever in Torah there's like God tells someone to set out somewhere. There's just something about that's very exciting to me. Avram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth that they had amassed, and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Avram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem at the terebinth of Moreh. The Canaanites were in the land. Okay, so now this is a quote from Simeon Tuval. Sarah traveled, was taken by Avram, from one hallowed place to another, or her birthplace, and Haran were both centers of moon worship and boasted large temple complexes. Once in Canaan, she seems never to have set foot on other than holy ground, symbolized by the sacred terebinth, the grove at Mamre being the most significant. Her life, as we shall see, was dedicated solely to those functions and religious implications. So here Tuval, and here's the little citation. So just by location, Tuval connects their travel also places with religious significance, and some of them also have trading significance. Maybe that's what Avram does for a living. But that is interesting, and especially because Mamre becomes Sarah's long-term home pretty much from this time forward. And there are a lot. I'm only going to go through some of the arguments of the book because I don't want to be overly reliant on it, but just because there's a lot in it. So if this is just scratching the surface. And I think in future Parshiot, I think I will also come back to this for Rivka and Rachel, because there's really interesting stuff about them as well. But anyway, I want to read this next quote from Breshit. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you." When Avram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Avram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels. This is a very interesting passage because it's just a really bizarre situation. Because of the whole ruse of it, how willing Avram seems to be to let his wife go into this, basically marry a king or maybe not marry, but like enter his harem, and also because this scenario is repeated. So Sarah does this again with Abimelech, the king of Gerar, and then her niece / daughter-in-law Rivka does the same thing also with Abimelech of Gerar. So it's a scenario that is repeated three times with two different couples and two different monarchs. So Tubal has an interesting explanation for it, taking into account something a priestess might do. This is a quote, again, from Sarah the priestess. "It is difficult to estimate at what period priestesses became celibate in the ancient world, but it is interesting to note in this connection that the most powerful goddess, the one represented by the priestess in the Eros Gamos, was Inanna." So I should probably put a definition of Eros Gamos, but I couldn't find a very good one. The Eros Gamos is a ritual where a priestess who is embodied by a goddess, namely Inanna, has sexual relations with a priest king, and that symbolic act is supposed to ensure the fertility of the land, because a lot of ancient religious beliefs connected human fertility with the fertility of the land. You could argue maybe there are places where Torah does that too, actually. I don't know. So that is the scenario Tubal is suggesting is happening with Sarah. So I'm going to go back to the quote from Tubal. She, Inanna, was never a mother goddess. She remained childless. Like Inanna, the priestess was to remain childless also. Only in a much later time are we told that if the priestess should conceive, the child of the sacred union was to be exposed to the elements and left to its fate, which was usually death. It could be conjectured that the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, which has caused scholars centuries of perplexity, had its origins in the patriarch's effort to comply with this tradition. Like the goddess and the priestess, the matriarch Sarah, and possibly Rebecca also, is portrayed as almost having sexual relations with kings, even though she remained childless for close to 30 years. And this is another quote from Tubal. So in this passage, she takes what happens in Breshit and puts it next to kind of a step-by-step description of what happens in the Eros Gamos ritual. So let's go through this. So looking at Genesis right now. 1. The famine was severe in the land. So there's fertility problems with the land. 2. The Lord afflicted his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarah. And if we compare that to the Eros Gamos, the marriage ritual, 1. Drought, calamity of nature. 2. Effective and unfavorable oracle. Because the priestess participating in the Eros Gamos ritual is an oracular priestess, and at some point in the process, she is an oracle, a prediction of what the harvest will be like, ensuring that the land will be fertile, or maybe that it won't be, based on what happens in the ritual. So this implies that something went wrong. Maybe Sarah gave a negative oracle. And so that's why she was actually told, well, not told to leave, but that's why she was gone. I was like, never mind, get out of my house. This is because something went wrong, and Sarah could not issue a good oracle to the king. So that really throws on its head more traditional readings, and obviously the textual reading we have of Sarai kind of doing a favor for Avram, so he doesn't get killed and he can, get all the supplies that they need. Which again is a scenario that is repeated 2 more times. I really I find this interpretation very fascinating. I also I like it because I feel like it gives Sarai more agency and more of a role than just having to allow herself to be kind of traded around just to protect her husband. Yeah, it just puts a completely different spin on everything that's happening. And this and some of the other arguments that Tubal put forward really turned a lot of this on its head for me and made me really, really excited about Breshit and about reading Torah. So let's keep going. I have another quote from Genesis. Okay, so we're in Breshit 16. Sarai, Avram's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Avram, "Look, the Lord has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid. Perhaps I shall have a son through her." And Tubal points out that the language is literally that I will be built up by her, meaning her household will be built up through Hagar, and she will have an heir. And Avram heeded Sarai's request. So Sarai, Avram's wife, took her maid, Hagar the Egyptian, after Avram had dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years, and gave her to her husband Avram as a concubine. He cohabited with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. And Sarai said to Avram, "The wrong done me is your fault. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. The Lord decide between you and me." Avram said to Sarai, "Your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right." Then Sarai treated her harshly, and she ran away from her. So I always get very moved by this passage, and I feel very sorry for Hagar, and I feel honestly kind of angry on her behalf. So what I'm going to present you is not necessarily justification of how Sarai treats her, but it puts it, and this is again from Sarah the priestess, from Savina Tuval, putting what Sarah does in some context so it can be interpreted a bit differently than how we traditionally interpret it. Okay. So Tubal compares Genesis 16 to the Code of Hammurabi, which would have been a code that could have been relevant in the culture that Sarai came from in Ur. So I'm going to read a quote from Tubal. Each verse in Genesis 16 corresponds to a paragraph in Hammurabi's code. Let us compare the code and the Bible. So here is the code. 1. If a priestess who is also a wife has given a slave girl to her husband. 2. And she bears a child. 3. If thereafter the maid goes about making herself equal to her mistress. 4. Her mistress may not sell her. 5. She may put to mark of a slave on her. I may put a mark. I might have typed that incorrectly. So from Genesis, we have, so Sarai took her maid and gave her to her husband as concubine. 2. And she conceived. 3. Her mistress was lowered in her esteem. 4. And this is a quote from Avram to Sarai, "Your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right." 5. Sarai treated her harshly. In other words, Sarah gave her handmaid to Avram as a concubine, but when the woman showed disrespect to her mistress, she was treated harshly. That is, Hagar was reduced to the status of a slave. Avram, deal with her as you think right, is a recognition of Sarah's authority. And note that this authority, these practices are something that, that a priestess would have in, that does it, in the society. Alright, let's move on. Okay, so here, going ahead to later in Genesis 16, this is where with Hagar in the wilderness after she has run away from Sarai and Avram. And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count." The angel of the Lord said to her further, "Behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. You shall call him Yishmael, for the Lord has paid heed to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell alongside of all his kinsmen." And she called the Lord, who spoke to her, "You are El Roi," by which she meant, "I have not gone on seeing after he saw me." The source I'm going to go from later has a slightly different translation of El Roi, but you get the gist. I like this part a lot. It shows Hagar connecting with God directly or through an angel, but pretty directly. Now, Hagar is not someone that we consider to be one of our matriarchs as Jews. But something about this passage, in my opinion, it shows that she is a matriarch of her own people, of her own community, because God promises her offspring and says, "And they shall be too many to count," which mirrors what God says to Abraham about his descendants. I think this establishes her as a matriarch. It's also very moving to me this part, he shall be a wild ass of a man. I highlighted it to the definition in Safari. One of my favorite things in Safari is to highlight Hebrew because it has a really nice the dictionary function, so you can look up different words. And wild ass can mean that someone is cruel, but it also means like someone who cannot be controlled. But so has like different connotations in different contexts. And in interpreting it as the latter, like someone who can't be controlled, I find that to be kind of moving and reassuring because Hagar is in a very subordinate position. She's someone who's not in control of her life. And I read this as her getting a message that he will be free and they will be free. One of the things I like about Torah, there's lots of very violent conflict between individuals and also between different tribes and cultures. But there's also a message that all of the different peoples represented are interconnected and that they're all related to each other. Like in last parsha in Noach, the siblings of Noach are themselves the ancestors of different like nations and ethnic groups, right? So that means that we all have common ancestors. And here, Hagar and Yishmael end up becoming the ancestors of like a whole other culture. So even though we don't see them spiritually as our ancestors, I think that's a beautiful thing that we are all interconnected, even though there's still subordination and things, and especially in the case like this. But there's also still an interconnection. I think that's very beautiful, and it shows you that every person can have a relationship to God, because Hagar has clearly a very close relationship to God. And she also talks to God later on when she is kicked out of Avraham and Sarah's household in the next parsha. Okay, so here I have some more fun quotes. See, I didn't want to rely completely on Sabina Tubal, even though she's amazing. This is from the Women's Torah Commentary. And this is the chapter on Lech Lecha, and it is written by, I'm sorry, I forgot the name, Rabbi Michal Shekel. Alright, so I want to read this. What actually happens to Hagar during this encounter with the divine? One can discover 3 occurrences in this parsha that mirror Avram's experiences. First, Hagar leaves her home, her personal Lech Lecha, go forth in the feminine. Although it's not specified as such in the text, this parallels Avram's Lech Lecha, go forth, in the masculine. Thus, her leaving is similar to his departure from his home. Second, God makes a brit, a covenant, with her, in which she is promised that she will have numerous offspring, just as Avraham receives the same assurance in a more elaborate covenant that appears later in this Torah portion, in Genesis 17:19. Third, she is told her son's name, just as Avraham will later be told his son's name before his birth. Here's a little citation for that. And I want to quote another of Rabbi Shekel's observations. Hagar names God El Roi, God who sees me. This is in response to God's naming of her child Yishmael, which means God hears. In naming God, Hagar affirms that God sees as well as hears. Here, too, that is a parallel with Avraham. After the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, Avraham calls the mountain where he offered his son Adonai sees, personalizing his relationship with God through the familiar name Adonai. Hagar gives her relationship with the divine a more formal aspect by using the title El, God. They have in common that both affirm God as seeing. Hagar is a woman who has a spiritual encounter and is strengthened by it to such an extent that she is the first person in the Torah who has the chutzpah to endow the divine with a name. I should mention this up top, but if at any point Those of you who are currently joining me have any thoughts, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I know not all of you are logged in to Twitch, so you might not have the ability, or you might just want to listen, which is totally fine. But please feel free to do that, and I will read them and everything. But otherwise, just listen. I'm going to take another swig of my almond milk because my throat is just very dry today. I was going to say, yeah, I love Rabbi Shekel's interpretation. The fact that it's very moving to me that the language Hagar uses shows that she's being seen and she's being heard, because she's living in an environment where she probably isn't really seen or heard except to the extent that she is in service to the people that she's tied to, that she's a maid or a slave to. So I really like this interpretation, and I didn't get the quote because I didn't want to have too many quotes, but Rabbi Shekel also notes that when Sarai becomes Sarah and Avram becomes Avraham, they each get a hey, or a letter that makes like the same sound that H makes, added to their name to symbolize, and the common interpretation is that is why it's added that way, because that symbolizes their connection to God. And Hagar's name does not change in this direction, but Hagar's name already starts with a hey. It's right at the beginning, so maybe she doesn't need that because she already has a connection to God. And she already has a very strong connection. So that is something that I think is very beautiful. And I'm going to end with a quote from a bit later in Genesis. God said to Avraham, "As for your wife Sarai, you shall not call her Sarai, but her name shall be Sarah. I will bless her. Indeed, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she shall give rise to nations. Rulers of peoples shall issue from her." And that's about the size of it. That's all I got this week. So, thank you for joining me. Let me get rid of this. Just bring this back. But I will, so I do this, I'm going to plan to do this every other week. I'd like to at least get through Bereshit. I don't know if I'm going to do it for all 5782. I'm just going to see. I mean, so far I like doing it a lot. But so 2 weeks from now would be October 30th, and that Parsha is Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. Also, we'll talk more about Sarah, and probably get into, I think, Rivka's life too, if my memory serves. I haven't read the Parsha yet. So thank you very much for watching this recording. Shabbat Shalom, and I will see you next time.